All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to webinar number 5 of our bi-monthly transportation performance management webinar series, sponsored by the TPM Pool Fund with support from the AASHTO Committee on Performance-Based Management Leadership and FHWA. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us today. I am Christos Xenofondos, Assistant Director at the Rhode Island Department of Transportation, and I am here as the TPM Pool Fund Lead and AASHTO Committee on Performance-Based Management Vice Chair. As shown on this slide, for more information on this webinar, I think we go to the next slide now. Series, just visit the new and improved AASHTO TPM portal. I'm gonna ask Lori or Perry to actually provide you with the hard link on chat. And if you're ready, if you don't have the page bookmark, please bookmark it, because you're gonna find lots of great information on the new TPM Pool Fund site. So once you are there, click on TPM webinar series and you will find more information under the events in the main menu. You can also access the handouts for today's webinar at the bottom of the webinar control panel on your screen. Links to the video and slides from today's webinar and also archived content from previous webinars are also posted on the TPM portal, and you can find them there. Currently, we have all attendees on mute. If you have any questions for the presenters during today's webinar or any suggestions for future webinar topics, please submit them through the Q&A feature on the control panel. Any of the questions that we receive, we are going to save them and answer them towards the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. So on behalf of Matt Harty, I also want to welcome everybody. Matt is not able to be here with us today, but the purpose of the webinar series is to support the broad TPM community by sharing lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge with the transportation performance management community. Sharing knowledge and building capacity are important facets of the TPM Pool Fund and the main reason behind why we started it. I think you're going to enjoy today's presentation, so risk management on TPM. Our webinar today will highlight some of the important work and research that's going on around the country and at the national level related to the intersection of risk and performance management. With that, I am going to turn it over to Yanna Park from Spyboard Partners to share our agenda for today's webinar. Yanna?
Thanks, Christos. As Christos has said, our topic today is the intersection of risk and performance management. Kicking off the presentations on our agenda today is Pete Stefanos from Federal Highways, who will provide FHWA's approach to enterprise risk management. Then Gene Wallace from the Minnesota DOT and Nathan Lee from the Utah DOT will discuss several ongoing and recently completed research projects related to risk management topics. Next, we'll hear from Paul Deggs of the Tennessee DOT, who will talk about his agency's enterprise risk management efforts incorporating long-term employee health and safety, a very relevant topic for these times and certainly will be important post-COVID. And John Milton from the Washington State DOT will wrap up our presentations with a discussion of how his agency is practicing performance-based risk management and organizational risk strategies. We'll finish up today with a Q&A, so please submit your comments or questions using the Q&A feature throughout the webinar today, and you'll see that in the webinar control panel. We'll make the slides and video available after today's webinar on the TPM portal at transportation-management.us/TPM/TPM webinar series under the events drop down on the main menu. Now let's get started with Pete Stefanos from Federal Highways. Pete is the Director of Federal Highways Office of Stewardship, Oversight, and Management. In this capacity, Pete heads the agency's administration of many core federal aid highway programs and is leading FHWA's effort to implement a performance-based federal highway program, including the development and implementation of highway asset management plans. Pete is also leading agency efforts to implement enterprise risk management into federal highway planning and business operations. Please join me in welcoming Pete.
Thanks, Jana, and I'm glad to be here today. Since we're talking about risk today, one risk event that could occur while I'm on the screen, since I am home and I don't have a blurred background or a background. You might see, you probably just saw one of my older kids walking up and down the stairs, or hear my daughter screaming in the background since I'm at home today. Usually try to go in the office for these events, but that wasn't possible today. So I'm glad to be here. Like Kiana said, what I hope to talk about is what we're doing with regard to enterprise risk management, and talk a little bit about how that helps us with advancing performance management as an agency. So actually looks like I can, well, next slide. And as many government organizations, we've been, actively practicing risk management for some time. We have at our unit level, we have 70 units, organizational units within our organization that each on their own carry out risk management each year. They prioritize those risks and they use the responses to those risks to identify the critical activities they're going to work on during that year. And then we have, as an agency, we've traditionally had what we call corporate risk. These are sort of the highest level risk that we want to communicate to the agency, that either they're opportunities we want to pursue or they're threats we want to avoid. And so enterprise risk management, we always ask ourselves, okay, well, this is a new thing, but how is it different than what we're doing? And so we actually had this slide that tried to explain sort of what's the added piece to enterprise risk management that we didn't quite have already in place. And so we're focusing on the word enterprise. When it comes to making decisions particularly that impact our whole agency, that we are going to have this sort of enterprise posture with regard to some of those decisions. And we want to make them in a way that allows us to most effectively and efficiently carry out our programs to meet defined objectives. So in the past, although we had corporate risk and we had the unit level risk that we used to make decisions, we really didn't have where it's necessary to have consistency on where we were able to take risk or want to avoid threats. We really didn't have that clearly documented. So that's sort of the enterprise piece that is being put in place now. And I would say we're still in a evolving state. We're not there yet, but we do want to make sure that we are, as an agency, we clearly communicate where we can take risk and where we cannot. And then how do we operate that way to make sure that we're staying true to that. Next slide. So what do we need to have in place? Some of this we had in place and some we did not to make it work. The first, which we had in place to some degree, was having some governance around those decisions we're making that impact the whole agency, that really drive those objectives. And right now we've put in place, through our leadership team, a governance structure that requires certain decisions that have that kind of impact need to go through that unit. And then any direction we're providing to the agency with regard to where there needs to be consistency and where we're taking risks for avoiding threats, that also is governed by our leadership group. So that's in place now. We meet quarterly with that leadership team when and we make those decisions. The second was objectives. We always have had objectives with our strategic planning process, but what we didn't have was objectives that covered everything we did. We had objectives that were focused on where we have priorities, where we were trying to move the needle, but we didn't have objectives that really defined the outcomes of everything we could possibly do in our organization. So now we've identified 11, we call them program objectives, that lay out sort of the outcome potential in each of the things we do. And then our governance body, they set sort of the direction we want to take in each of those areas. The third thing that we actually didn't have entirely, we call operating principles, but it's basically risk appetite. So that component of enterprise risk management, that's risk appetite, which is basically clearly stating, we call them green light and red light areas. The green light areas are the areas where there's essentially encouragement to be pursuing opportunities that by pursuing them, we could get the benefits of achieving some objectives, but also we might become more vulnerable to risk. And that's okay. There are some areas where we're willing to take on those risks in pursuit of the opportunity. And then there's the red light areas where, the red light areas are safety, public safety, bridge safety, financial integrity, and now equity, that we are, anytime there is a potential threat that could impact those areas, we're going to act swiftly and promptly. And those are the red light areas. The assessments are we have a structured process now that we use for assessing program areas that have impact across our agency. The areas that require the full agency to support, those are assessed on a regular frequency. When we assess them, we look at how effective the work we do is in achieving the objectives for that area, how efficient we are in carrying out our operations to achieve them, and then also if there's any requirements, how compliant we are. We've done 9 assessments so far in the beginning of this effort, and as a result of that, we have, as we call it, we've put some things on our plate, but we also have taken some things off our plate by looking at sort of the controls that we're trying to mitigate risk, and where do we need to, based on a risk appetite, loosen up some of those or tighten them up. And then every year we put out a planning document that directs the agency where there needs to be consistency, what's important to be working on, and what can you stop working on. Then finally, monitoring. We have every 6 months we put out a report that basically talks about sort of, are we getting done what we hope to get done, and is it producing the results we hope that it would produce? And that is still evolving, but we do have a Power BI built report right now that all the units report to. Next slide. So this next slide is kind of busy, so I'm not going to go over all the details. I know we don't. Next slide, please. Have enough time today, but we can follow up with me if you want to. Oh, I'm sorry, previous slide. There's a little bit of lag. So this is sort of putting those pieces together. The box in the middle, the work we do, this basically is where we're putting things on a plate, how we're operating as an agency. And I already mentioned that we break that out into assessable areas. We assess them at some frequency. Right now, we're thinking around every 6 or 7 years. We look at efficiency, effectiveness, and compliance. And as a result of that, we have a plan that may suggest we're going to change how we operate. And we monitor that plan, and we have good metrics for monitoring that. And when we do that, we are building tolerances using our risk appetite. If you look at this decision box on the left, where if we're operating within that tolerance, everything's good. If we're outside the tolerance, we might consider putting some controls in place or tightening controls. And if we're really doing well, maybe there's an opportunity to loosen up the control. So we want to try to avoid those situations where a bad thing happens, and as a result of bad thing happens, we slap in a control to try to mitigate that bad thing from ever happening again. And all of a sudden, we put things on our plate that maybe weren't really necessary. And so that's what we're hoping to have is a good sort of structured process to make those decisions, particularly when they impact our resources. And then at the end of the day, we're trying to achieve these objectives with each incoming administration. Of course, we have different levers that are being pushed to drive these objectives, and where we want to push hard and where we don't want to push hard. And so we make those adjustments to our strategic planning and to our risk appetite. So one last slide is to talk a little bit about sort of how this applies to performance. At Federal Highway Administration, there's, our role, varies, but we do not, of course, have a direct role in making the investment decisions that ultimately lead to improved performance with the operations and performance of our system. That's a state and local agency decision. So what we do is we try to provide the technical resources, the support, where there needs to be requirements in place, and even oversight of those requirements. And so the question then becomes, where can we be most effective with our role? Where's our role necessary to either pursue these opportunities or to avoid the threats that could impact the achievement of performance for the system? And so when we very first got started with performance management, we identified 10 different areas in which we could play a role in supporting overall performance of our nation's highway system. And they ranged from having, tight oversight programs to providing tools and resources to ensuring quality data, to support target setting, for reporting at a national level. There was all these different sort of things we could do. There were 10 of them. And what we did was we met with our agency leadership across all 70 units, and we asked them, for each of the 10, where do you think we could have the greatest impact as an agency in moving the objectives? And the objectives are listed out at all the performance areas. There's 17 different areas where we are required for performance within TPM. And then we got that feedback, and then we asked ourselves, which of these areas that particularly the areas that have potential impact, are we not at all ready? That we're not prepared as an agency to actually seize that opportunity or to avoid that threat. And we focused our attention in 2 areas. Rather than trying to do everything, we focused on data quality, supporting and ensuring good quality data that comes in from the states, and then also really getting a handle on target setting, like understanding sort of how can we be not just at the table or not just in the conversation, but at the table when it comes to collaborating with states and locals on target setting. So those 2 areas we focused hard on. We developed metrics for both of those areas internally on what we can do to be more ready, and track those and put some tolerances around them to say that, for a couple years, we're really going to try, and if we're not making progress, start doing more, putting more on our plate to be there. So, I think we did make some impacts there for the data quality. We came with the pavement report card. That report card, is being used by states today. There's much more complete, accurate, quality data for pavement reporting than there's been ever before. And then on the target setting side, our objective was just to make sure that our division staff, the folks that are working with the states and locals, that they understand, what is a target? How does it work? How can we be at the table with the state, supporting them? So the metrics we were there was more about raising our proficiency levels, and we were able to achieve that. When it's hard for us to put a tolerance or a target around the actual outcome, can we have more bridges in good condition? Can we have more reliable roadways? Because there's so many, authority points that we touch to make that happen. But there are other opportunities that can be measured a lot through our operations on how we can be influential and supporting overall good quality performance for our system. We've had these conversations too about looking at the risk and trade-offs of, like, for example, how much do we put on our website when it comes to actual state performance? There's opportunities if you put everything we have, put it in a way that you can show comparisons and do analytics and everything with what's there. But then there's also a lot of risks that come with that. It's right, it's finding that balance, having a good sort of direction from the agency on where we want to push and where we can let go. So we're still in an evolving process. That's a little bit about what we're doing with ERM, and sort of how we try to apply it to performance. It's still sort of a process that we're advancing and learning. So that's what I want to talk about today. Two key contacts for risk management: Daniel Federa and Susanna Reck, who you all know, on the transportation performance management side, if you need more information.
All right, thank you, Pete. So if you have any questions for Pete, please put them in the Q&A panel. All right, for our next presentation, we'll hear from Gene Wallace from the Minnesota DOT and Nathan Lee from Utah DOT. Gene is the Assistant Director for the Modal Planning and Program Management Division at Minnesota DOT. She is the chair of the AASHTO Committee on Performance-Based Management Subcommittee on Risk Management. She's joined by Nathan Lee, who is the Director of Technology and Innovation at Utah DOT. He is the co-chair of the AASHTO CPBM Subcommittee on Risk Management. Please join me in welcoming Jean and Nathan.
Okay, good. Great. Well, thanks for having us here today. Nathan and I are going to be talking a little bit about the history of research and risk management. That's been very much done in conjunction with AASHTO and with FHWA and TRB. And that has all been in support of the TPM efforts. I'm going to start out with doing a little bit of the historical work that is leading up through the publication of the AASHTO Guide on Enterprise Risk Management. And Nathan is going to be talking about some more of the research that has been done and is ongoing since that time. So let's see if my screen will switch here. Okay. So what do we mean by risk? The development of the work through the AASHTO Guide has taken a very broad definition used in defining risk management by defining it just as you see on the screen there, very positive or the positive or negative effects of uncertainty or variability upon agency objectives. And this is a very good way to define risk that is very closely tied to a lot of what Pete was just talking about with agency objectives and through performance in specific. And so it not only does it talk about this idea of, risk talks about uncertainty. Something might happen. I don't know if it will or not. It could happen. And if it does happen, it could be very bad. But it also recognizes that risk is both a threat and an opportunity, meaning if it could happen, it could also be very good and we should take advantage of it. And so when we think about enterprise risk management or risk management in general, and in conjunction with performance, it's what are those things that might happen that we should either take advantage of or avoid or minimize in accordance with trying to meet our performance objectives. Enterprise risk management also looks at risk across all levels. And you see here that, we've got this diagram that shows where risks to the enterprise can affect the program, project, and activity level. So say, for example, if there is an enterprise risk that might be really relevant to DOTs right now regarding equity and ensuring that your agencies are incorporating equity into all decisions, that's a risk that feeds not only across the enterprise, but feeds into how you do your planning and programming, and then how you do your project selection and development, and down to the activity level of engagement, employment, workforce, et cetera, all the way through the agency. So those are some examples, or that's one example of how enterprise risk really affects the entire agency. And at the same time, risks identified at an activity level, for example, can also feed across or up through the agency, through projects and programs, and make it all the way to an enterprise level risk as well. Some of the history, and I can't believe it's been 10 years already, was how this really started was through an international scan that was done through the NCHRP program in conjunction with the Federal Highway Administration. And through this international scan, a group of folks from the US went to Australia, went to various countries in Europe, and I believe to Japan as well, and looked at how various agencies in those countries were implementing or were creating a structure for enterprise risk management. That led to the publication of a report completed in 2011 that had some pretty big findings in regard to enterprise risk management in the US. And what it noted was US DOTs are really lagging. At that time, again, this is 10 years ago, more than 60% of the state DOTs didn't have a formal enterprise risk management program. In addition, 40% never or rarely applied enterprise risk strategies. But at the same time, most US agencies that practice risk management applied it to construction projects, but didn't really apply it to broader programs in their enterprises or as a whole. And I think that was very much a factor of, there was a lot of work at that time, 10 years ago or so, in doing Monte Carlo simulations in construction and really focusing on those construction and project management risks, especially for larger major projects, but not necessarily as it applied to program management or enterprise risk management. As you can see in the boxes below that, there were several sets of activities that were identified in the 2011 International Scan. In particular, I want to highlight three. One is NCHRP Project 20-2474, which really focused on bringing the idea of enterprise risk management to state DOT CEOs. There was kind of a set of instructions or a primer developed for CEOs on enterprise risk management, as well as a workshop that was held in 2015 for state DOT CEOs on enterprise risk management, just to bring that concept of risk and performance being very much tied together, and how enterprise risk management can be a tool to assist in ensuring that agencies are meeting their enterprise objectives. In addition, the NHI Enterprise Risk Management course was developed, and there was discussion at a governance level, or thinking about governance, on how to incorporate risk management more broadly across all state DOT agencies, and having that forum for risk to be discussed. That really at the time was a discussion of a creation of an AASHTO task force on risk management, which then led to essentially the development of the CPBM subcommittee on risk management. So all three of those things that are circled there, whoops, some issues here, all happened, so that's really good. And then in 2016, the AASHTO Guide for Enterprise Risk Management was published. And this is really the first comprehensive guide for transportation agencies on enterprise risk management. It is very much based on existing constructs or platforms for risk management. Essentially, it adopted the ISO standard for risk management. And again, ISO is International Organization of Standardization. And it's a very much plan, do, check, act type of model, where first you really establish the context of risk management and agency objectives, identify risks to meeting those objectives, monitoring and ensuring that those risks are managed and mitigated to the extent possible, or enhanced if there are opportunities, and then going back through again and monitoring and communicating about risk management. Also included in the ERM guide are 2 chapters worth of practical examples from state DOTs that facilitate risk management through various areas of their departments, be it financial or asset management or program related, etc. So it's really meant to be a practical tool, a practical guide, very much in a transportation context as it relates to how you can build enterprise risk management within your agency and how it supports TPM. A couple other things in the guide. It really specifically discusses the relationship between risk and performance. It realizes that symbiotic relationship of identifying performance targets and objectives, and ensuring that you identify risks that might prevent you or might support you better in meeting those objectives. And then it also has what I think is a really useful thing, which is the maturity guide, or a maturity model for risk management. So you can identify kind of where you are as an agency in your implementation of risk management, but also where you think you want to go next, and some useful tools on how to get there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nathan to talk about what's been happening since the publication of the guide.
Well, thank you, Jean, and it's grateful to be here with you all today as we look at this. And the guide was a huge step, I think, in moving enterprise risks forward. And the subcommittee that Jean and I work on established back in 2017, our goal was to develop and focus research and training that would help agencies update their TAMs and their TPM process to really address this enterprise risk management. So starting in 2018, what you see here on the screen is that this guide, as she talked about, it laid out those formal and systematic efforts to control uncertainty and variability. Jean mentioned those in the beginning of the pros and cons there, but it helped to lay out that uncertainty and variability on an organization's strategic objectives by managing the risks at all those different levels. And the guide explains how managing the risk at an enterprise level provides agencies with the increased likelihood to completes a circle, if you want to look at it that way, of strategic planning and performance management by adding this third component in there. The guide described how to manage the risks at 4 levels that we talked to you earlier, and it established the community of practice. Now, once they did that community practice, they also did the pilot states. There were 3 states, Washington, Tennessee, and Utah, that worked on that particular guide, and the effort's been a launching point for numerous websites, webinars, the workshops, and the research projects. And you can find that original research link here. You can also find the guide in the AASHTO bookstore that Jean talked about, and the report on the implementation pilots are being finalized, and it'll be available to everyone soon, so be looking for that. Let's go to the next slide. Other projects that we've been working on include NCHRP 08-113. And this particular project, the Integrating Effective Transportation Performance Risk and Asset Management, it's being administered by Jacobs. Mara Campbell's team's been working on it. The project isn't enterprise specific, but it's helping states build integration roadmaps that define their risk activities in relation to performance and asset management. The NCHRP 20-12304 is the development of a risk management strategic plan and research roadmap, also led by Mara Campbell's team. And it's focused on helping agencies develop a comprehensive strategic approach to their action plans through either their TAMs or their TPM processes and addressing their enterprise risk management. And then thirdly on here, we have the NCHRP 23-09, which is the scoping study to develop the basis for the high standard to conduct an all hazard risk and resiliency analysis. Now think about this, many agencies have tried to apply principles of proprietary things like RAMCAP, FHWA's vulnerability assessment framework, etc., but it's been difficult for agencies to quantitate the probability of risk by hazard types or by geographic location or other means. So transportation agencies also seem to struggle with proprietary solutions that have been formatted for other scientific disciplines, as well as the very definitions for risk and resilience when you're evaluating an all hazard risk situation for transportation, given each individual unique circumstance that exists within a state or a certain area. So this project's been focused on establishing an approach and a standard protocol for risk and resiliency for highway assets within the transportation arena. And if they can get definitions and approach to workforce and some of that standard protocol, it should really help, as Jean showed, get that, what was a decade ago, 60% of agencies not even involved. This should really be the next step in making sure that at least all agencies are involved in some way. So let's go to the next slide. So that 2309 that I talked about is shown here on this slide. And what we want you to know is this all hazard risk has a workshop coming up. And you can see it's available both in March and April. And we invite you to register there. And if you need to, you can contact Maria Penna. You can see her email there below, and to sign up for this website. But if this interests you, to be able to figure out how to get your agency fully engaged, this is the place to be. This is a website to take a look at and see where you want to go. Next slide. So as you kind of come and learn and join in the conversation, there's some new opportunities to think about, and that's what are the next upcoming efforts to be there. So you can see in this one, BO3, the Building Risk Management Momentum in Agencies. Why is it, think about this, why is it that we have a lot of reports or training, but we're slow to get adoption of enterprise risk strategies across the agencies? This proposed study is what's going to help us break down some of those potential barriers and roadblocks that agencies are facing to get successful programmatic change. I like to think of it, the principle from the book Good to Great. This study will help the agencies to get their flywheel spinning. We're just really in that work, and we need to advance that, and that's what this study is all about. So if you're the voting member, or if you're not, we encourage you to find your voting member that votes in this particular area and have them place their vote for this particular area, because it has a lot of opportunity to help us get that flywheel spinning and do the momentum. The other, AO4, which is developing methods to allow agencies to incorporate risk assessment at a project and network level. This research really helps us move to the next steps in the work that's being done by 2309. So if you like where the All Hazards 2309 is going, then this research is for you, and it's one you want to vote for, because it's going to help us develop quantitative, repeatable approaches for assessing the likelihood of consequences that are related to different types of threats. It also is going to develop a visual tool like a dashboard. Thinks in terms of a dashboard, a visual tool that allows an agency to reflect on their level of risk and their effectiveness of their proposed mitigation action. So the opportunity now to see that live, see what those choices you're making, can give you some live analysis for reflection as you think about the different enterprise choices you want to make on risk. And lastly, it allows risk and resilience to be evaluated and on par with the traditional performance measures. So again, if this interests you and you like that idea about the visualization, please vote, or let those who are in charge here place their vote and get that information out for your agencies, because those votes are due the 1st of next month. Next slide. So in conclusion, we have a subcommittee meeting. It's the second Monday of every month. We'd love to have you come out and participate with us. We encourage you to vote, vote high as well. If you don't just vote, give us some high marks if you like those activities. Vote high on them. And we hope that if you're not using some of the research tools that we talked to you about today, or if you aren't familiar, that those tools are available, to jump on and grab a hold of those. Come participate on a committee or in the community of practice, and we'll help, and others will share, just like we are in today's webinar, to help advance enterprise risk and resilience in our nation's transportation system. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Paul Deggs of the Tennessee DOT. As Deputy Commissioner and Chief Engineer of TNDOT, Paul oversees the design and implementation of the department's engineering projects. He also is responsible for the activities of 12 divisions and 4 regional offices. Paul has overseen the awarding of more than 6,200 contracts with a construction value of more than $13 billion. Paul currently serves as the Vice Chairman of the AASHTO Council on Highways and Streets. Okay, take it away, Paul.
Thank you, Anna. Y'all hear me good?
Yes.
All right. Well, great. So I was kind of asked to talk a little bit about how enterprise risk management can be incorporated into employee health and safety, and to really kind of talk a little bit about how COVID-19 has impacted things. So, you know, like most other transportation agencies, our ability to deliver our projects and programs are primarily dependent on having the staff resources available to deliver the work. So keeping our employees safe is really a priority. And I think if you look around transportation agencies, whether it's a transit agency, a DOT, you know, city, county governments, really keeping your employees safe and able to do the work is important. So having some long-term risk management practices being incorporated into your employee health and safety is something that we're interested in. We've been looking at it at TDOT. And I think in particular, the COVID-19 has really magnified the importance of how the risk of employee health and safety is a big impact. So let me just kind of give you a little bit of background on things. And so, our agency, like many, staffed up real big during the interstate construction era. So in the late 1970s, we had about 7,000 employees. And since that time, we've been getting smaller and smaller. We're about 4,000 employees today. We were actually down to about 3,000 about 5 years ago. So an interesting thing in our agency, so today, over 50% of our employees have less than 5 years with the department. And so, the millennials, Gen Z, and I guess we'll soon be hiring Gen Alpha employees, and they've kind of got a different view of the workplace. And one of the things that we kept looking at, and this was pre-COVID, was how can we capitalize on the strengths and talents of these new generations? And, because we want to be able to create a work environment that meets their desires, because we've got to be able to recruit these people. And so we began looking at how we could start doing that several years ago. And we started looking at some of the alternative workplace concepts. We've got a program in our state government where we're trying to reduce our office footprint and give some of that flexibility to our employees to really let their how they want their work style and lifestyle to kind of work. And this alternative workplace concept that we have, it really allows us to increase our productivity by providing some flexible work schedules, different workspace options, and some of these multi-user workstations that allow us to do things a little bit differently. And it goes back to work from home, mobile work office, and some of the free address concepts. So as we started moving into 2019 and implementing this concept, we piloted it in a couple of our divisions. And but by 2019, we were having some concerns, particularly our longer tenured managers were not all of that keen on the idea. And they said, oh, everybody just needs to come to work, And so we were having a little bit of struggle with that. And that's when COVID hit. So COVID hit right at the time where we were having a lot of that discussion with some of our, not all, but some of our senior managers were struggling a little bit. And so COVID-19 required us really to look hard at how we could protect employee health and welfare and still get our mission accomplished. And what was so interesting about how it worked for us is a lot of the legwork we had done looking at trying to address a enterprise risk in hiring staff actually worked out well for us. So we did start digging into, when COVID-19 hit, to look at, well, what other risk did we have? We really did not have good cleaning protocols for our facility, so to speak. I imagine anybody that has worked at a DOT or any company just about, there's always those few employees that their vehicle is a rolling landfill. And so we had to put metrics in place to look at how we do cleaning of our facilities. But we also looked at things from, like I said, the vehicles, digital signatures, electronic material certifications, training. DOTs do a lot of training. So from a risk standpoint, COVID required us to step back and look at a lot of different things. In response to COVID, we came up with like 3 different types of employees. We have our field maintenance people, that's people patching potholes, replacing signs, pulling ditches. Our field construction staff, who already had a mobile workforce, but we had to modify things a bit to get proper spacing and some cleaning protocols in place. And then our office staff as well, to try to look through there. So each of these programs required us to develop some specific performance measures and looking at how we could ensure that we had a COVID-free workplace. Very data intensive. One of the things we wanted to do is to collect data on, you know, are people being exposed? What is our exposure rate for our employees as compared to the general population? Are people getting exposed at work? Where are they getting exposed? So trying to do a lot of data collection. We also, from an enterprise standpoint, wanted to see what was going on with how our customers was doing. So, you know, we were measuring traffic flow on our network and really in all modes, certainly on highways, but looking at the transit agencies, even looking at the air carriers on a commercial level, plus our local airports across the state. And trying to be able to figure out, you know, what is the data telling us, you know. So from an enterprise standpoint, we needed to be able to have an idea of how our budget was going to be impacted. And so certainly we, you know, being funded through fuel revenues on the state level, we had to have that. So a lot of that data collection from a performance measurement standpoint, really, you know, our traffic volumes are indicative or you know, they corroborate at least with the with our revenues. And so that allowed us to really make some projections on how we would be impacted during the fiscal year. And as far as being able to continue to deliver transportation projects rather than hunkering down and just not spending money. A couple of other enterprise issues that we looked at during the COVID, the peak of the COVID during 2020 had to do with onboarding of staff. So one of the things we were concerned about is, you know, in a 4,000 employee organization, you have people retiring, you know, people changing jobs. Even during COVID, we had that going on. And instead of just losing staff, one of the things we wanted to do was to continue to have an onboarding program. So we continue to hire engineers out of college. We even kept our seasonal program where we hire college seasonal students as well. It is kind of awkward to have employees come in that you've never seen before, hand them a computer and some how-to manuals and say, we'll see you online tomorrow. And so, but that was a win for us. We have
Hey, Paul, we seem to have lost.
I know with our seasonal and our new employees had very rewarding first years. We'll say that diversity, or y'all, can you hear me now?
Yes, you're back.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, I'm back. I'll back up a little bit. So I talked a little bit about our seasonal employees. So very important that we continue our college program. Our summer employment with the colleges around the country is a good tool we use for hiring you know, graduate engineers. So that was a program we felt it was important to continue with. And diversity hiring, we feel it's important to be reflective of the people of our state. And so having diversity in our program is we feel is critical to the people of our state, feeling that we are, you know, meeting the needs across the state. And then on the public involvement side, so one of the big issues that we were trying to deal with, because we were still delivering our projects, was how do we have effective communication with the public? So from a risk management standpoint, all of these things kind of go back into you need to have your performance metrics in place. As Jean mentioned in her presentation, doing you know, a risk management, you know, where does your state stand? We are trying grow in this area. I think several of the states on this presentation are part of the NCHRP project to implement the risk the guide for enterprise risk management. So we were a pilot state in that program, trying to make things move and look at how risk in our agency affects things, and trying to normalize across the entire program how we do things. And the pilot program, for instance, we looked at inconsistencies in our quick clearance practices for crashes, and then a couple of initiatives on project delivery and plans and construction plans. I will say, back to the employee health and safety, the data is a key. So when collecting your data on what's going on with your staff and putting performance metrics in place is a linkage that has to happen. To understand your risk, you have to have data to be able to manage your risk. With that, I'll turn it back over to Hayana.
Thanks, Paul. And wrapping up for our presentation, we have John Milton joining us from the Washington State DOT. John's the Director of Transportation Safety and Systems Analysis. He leads a cross-functional multidisciplinary division with performance, strategic, enterprise, risk, knowledge, and change management, as well as Washington State DOT's research and library service offices. John is Safety Section Chair for the TRB and Chair of the World Road Association, also known as PR, Technical Committee on Road Safety, and Vice Chair for the Committee on Safety, and a member of the Risk Management Subcommittee for AASHTO. So I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you for the introduction, Hannah. Today we're going to discuss the intersection of risk management and performance, and I'm going to provide kind of the context as I see it from Washington State's perspective. And we've had a lot of opportunity to learn a great deal of things. And I was on the regional tour that went around the countries, and that has provided me such a great wealth of benefit. If there's any possibility we could ever do something like that again, I would jump into it in a second, or recommend anybody who's doing risk and performance management to do the same. Next slide. So today I'd like to discuss performance-based risk management. It's something that we really are focusing on within Washington State DOT. Talk a bit about risk strategies. We're going to highlight a little bit about ERM practices incorporating health and safety, and I think all of us are having to deal with that issue right now as we speak, in a differing and evolving and a complex environment where we're having to change things on a daily basis. We're going to share WSDOT's organizational risk strategies, the evolution, the current practices, and some of the lessons that we've learned. Next slide. So let me give you a bit of perspective. I shared this slide that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. As we went through, and I think one of the advantages that has happened with WSDOT is that we've been able to combine a number of different offices: our strategic management, performance management, risk management, knowledge management, and research offices. We don't have asset management within our organization, but that ability to bring those things together really helped us understand how performance and all these other things work together as a system. It also taught us about the necessary processes and procedures and policies that you really need to get in alignment for your best risk management kind of strategies to get things going. So think about it in this way. Strategic objectives really set the context for how we're going to be doing things within our organizations. We move to performance management that defines how we measure that. And really, that performance management has a great deal of impact on what we do in terms of asset management overall. So if you set a very high standard for performance, that means you're going to have the assets, the people, the infrastructure, whatever it might be, to be able to do the proper asset management. And any choice that you make within asset management, particularly in a constrained environment, as many of us are learning, really affects other parts of the system. So if you're putting and need to put a whole bunch of money into preservation, for instance, that's going to impact your safety and mobility programs more likely than not, unless you have an endless stream of money. And therefore, risk management really comes into play. And as others have suggested, there's different areas of risk management. The way that we generally focus is the enterprise risk management, but we're also doing asset risk management and project and program level risk management. And the issue we see there is that we're really trying to be proactive in the way that we're doing things and reduce the potential for issues to occur, which really leads into quality management and lean processes. Those areas are really to reduce the potential for variability in the products that you're dealing with, in the outcomes that you're wishing to deal with. And so that also plays an important part in how you deal with risk management. So you can see how we're evolving this. Once you learn the issues that you're seeing, change management, knowledge management, and research and innovation really get into strategies of how you're going to do risk management. So again, we see this in the broader context. Next slide. So risk is really risk and performance together, really two sides of the coin. You know, one of the things that we've learned as we have evolved from early stages of performance management, the way that we looked at that is to do performance type journalism. It really was how well we are doing in terms of producing our products. It was really important at the time that we showed that. And the reason that it was important for us is because we were trying to build trust, transparency, and all those issues that many state agencies deal with in trying to work through their organizational legislatures or commissions, whatever it might be. Now, if you take risk in consideration, I want to show the left part of the slide here. You can see if you look at our preservation and areas, it looks like things are really doing well. And that's if you look at the performance today. If you look at the performance more in the context of what's happening in the future, where we get into risk management, you're really seeing the two sides of the coin. Today, you may be doing things well, things are good. Something may have happened in the system that has made an effective or significant change, but really isn't indicative of the overall performance. So that proactive approach becomes extremely important to you being successful. And for us, that is something that we're learning right now every day and trying to evolve. In fact, we had a discussion on this very issue this morning. Next slide. Now, this is just a slide to show you essentially how you might communicate risk from current practices. As you see, this is a preservation slide. It's related to pavements, and it shows that as pavements essentially go down in or are not taken care of over a number of different years, the increase in cost becomes extremely high. Why does that matter? It matters very much so because that increase in cost, that ability to preserve those those pavements becomes increasingly impactful on the overall enterprise, as I suggested before. The inability to preserve creates greater risk, greater issues in assets, but not only in assets, but to all your other programs. Maintenance is going to have to pay more. Safety is going to have to do more. Safety is going to have to give part of its budget to be able to do the preservation. So these things, again, are in alignment. So if you go back to my previous slide, you can see these things all need to be aligned and understood in the greater context of what the trade-offs are within the overall organization, and not get hyper-focused on an asset manager only doing asset management, but getting into the greater context of the trade-off discussions. And that's one of the things that we're learning right now today and trying to get people to understand, look, we understand you're doing well. We understand that your assets are doing well, or they're not. And in this case, they're not. But think of it more in the context what you need to do to treat those things so that we don't have such a great deal of enterprise risk. Next slide. So current performance should not lead the agency into complacency as future looms, right? That's part of what this message is that if you get complacent on the things that are impactful in the future, that is a significant problem. Those mitigation strategies are really important. When performance and risk intersect, you must manage for the future in addition to managing for today. And that is what I think enterprise risk, if there's anything that we can do to kind of build this throughout the AASHTO community and other communities, I think we're going to be well benefited by doing so. Next slide. And this is particularly true for employee health and safety. We were fortunate enough to have a continuity operations plan within DOT and a method, essentially a process for us to be able to react to the potential for a pandemic. But we're learning a lot, and we've had long-standing practices about how employees are safe. And as we went into the pandemic, one of the issues that we really focused on is how do we get people safely back to work? Their safety is primary and paramount, and we are not going to move too quickly in doing that change until we're certain that we can follow the appropriate protocols. The impacts have been extremely beneficial. We operate a large ferry system, and we've been able to maintain pandemic-related illness to a very, very low amount. And those people are dealing with individuals every day on a daily basis, and we're still doing very good, as our construction products are doing extremely well. In fact, what we're finding is that any of the COVID-related illnesses that we find within our organization have been related to outside activities, not activities dealing with WSDOT. Innovations also help mitigate risks. So we have a great opportunity in the future from a road safety perspective, something that I really appreciate, in that we can bring connected and automated transportation related issues to help with those individuals who are out on the road risking their lives to provide our transportation on a daily basis. Smart roads, smart technology are going to provide new systems for us to be able to evolve. They're also going to create new risk for us, maybe moving that risk from the person to the system. But again, these are asset trade-offs that we have to make, and we will not trade off safety for our workers at all. So next slide. So our lessons learned, past versus future orientation. Performance is in the past tense. Don't forget that. We try to improve to the future, and risk is in the future tense. And that's one of the things that we were talking about as we were preparing for this presentation. We need to consider both in how we do things. That's one of our most valuable lessons that we learned. This is the context of how you communicate issues, how you communicate performance needs to also be communicated in terms of the risk and opportunities. I think a previous speaker talked about that. Performance reporting is not always the good story. That can be misleading in how things are perceived. For instance, if you take a topic and isolate a topic into showing good performance, that may be appropriate, but at the same time that may be appropriate, the reader may perceive that as something else, and that creates essentially credibility risk for the department. So an enterprise issue. The right metrics tell the full story. So having the right performance, having the right risk orientation tells the full story, and it's important from a risk perspective to incorporate trade-offs, to have performance, to have all these things, assets, quality, all that in the context of how you're perceiving and responding to your risk working together. It reveals a true picture of the trend. Next slide. So of all the way that you do business, we're lucky in that we have the opportunity to learn every day. Sometimes it doesn't feel so good, but we are evolving and we're aligning things differently each day that we do. We're now aligning our risk to our research program. We did that with our budgeting process. So we talk about what are the risks, how are they associated. People have to report from the enterprise risk manager or register. We're asking the same within our risk program. Quality and lean management obviously improve the process. One way to manage risk is to go through the process and see where issues exist. Knowledge management provides this great continuity, and if I can encourage any of you, work through knowledge management, the flow of data, the information flow of processes, the architectures being in place, governance is all important to the process. A direct relationship exists between how you manage your asset risk and performance. Key issue. Again, because those assets, when they're not managed well, impact everything within the department. It's hard dollars when you think in terms of assets. It's hard impacts when you think in terms of those areas that they're going to impact if you're not managing well within your asset performance. And finally, strategic management provides context and direction. And if we've learned anything, context is critically important to making sure you have performance. But without context, you're going to have a difficult time people going through the risk assessment procedure with you. And so that's another very important lesson that we've learned. Next slide. So in conclusion, enterprise is not a standalone process. It works together with all these things, and you need to align your manuals, your processes, your procedures, and your policies if you're going to be most effective within risk and performance management. Each risk management strategy involves risk and opportunity. We've heard that, and it therefore involves trade-offs. Impacts on performance can be negative and positive, and sometimes you're going to have to take from one area to give to another. And what we have been saying is performance without risk is a glide path to failure. So our recommendation is you consider these things both in the context of what they are individually, but what they are synergistically as well. In the final slide. So if you have any questions, you can contact me. Thank you very much, and I will turn it back to you, Hannah.
All right, thanks, John. That was a great presentation. So if I could ask all of our panelists to put their cameras back on. And so we're gonna go through the Q&A now. So if you have questions, please add them to the questions part of your menu bar. So David Schwartz from Kansas DOT is asking for the link to register for the March 22nd ERM training. So if someone, I don't have that link. If anybody has that link, if you could put it into the chat, and David could pick it up from there. Otherwise, David, we'll find it for you and email it if we can't get it before the end of the webinar today. Here's a question for Pete. You talked about that data quality was one of the primary risks that you had prioritized, and I was just curious, what were the metrics that you used to move the needle in terms of improving your data quality to mitigate your risk, and what were some of the the actions you took that made a difference?
Sure. We had like I mentioned, we had put together we particularly had issues with payment data. And so that was the focus first, was, which data was, and that was payment data. And we had a payment report card we came up with that had sort of individual scores, I'll call them, on the report card for each state. And so, for example, there was, to what extent is the full system being reported? Was there any part of it not reported? Were there bridges identified and what was reported to HPMS that were not identified in the NBI, the National Bridge Inventory? So there were a few, there were like a handful of indicators that were in this report. And so for each state, we knew we had a threshold for each of those that we were hoping to get each state at a certain level of quality or completeness. And they were either red or green. And we rolled all that up and we looked at, okay, what's the current status? And we looked at, okay, what percentage of the states have some issues with their bridge reporting? What percentage of states have issues with completeness of data, timeliness of reporting? And then we worked with our divisions to say that we instructed through them to work with their state to focus in on those that were below the thresholds to try to get them above. And actually within, I would say 2 years, this is before the rules were effective, we started this work. Within 2 years, basically all of those were above the threshold. So those are the indicators we were looking at. And the good news is that as a result, there haven't been any compliance issues. Well, I wouldn't say entirely, but there's only been a state or two that's had some impacts as a result of not meeting the requirements that were in the reg. So we saw that as a big sort of gap in the area that we need to prioritize on. Then when we got to other data like reliability, we were really, okay, how can we address that? That's a new area, travel time reliability at the NPM RDS, and rolling up that information for metric level data reporting to HPMS. And there we partnered with AASHTO, and through the pool fund provided an opportunity for states that didn't have tools to be able to participate in the pool fund through a particular task to get that tool, the easy button tool as it's called, to roll up the information and report it to FHWA. So we haven't actually had very little, if any, issues with data quality when it comes to travel time reporting. So those are a couple examples that we focused in on the on data quality, and now I feel pretty good about that area. So although we were paying a lot of attention to that, still it's not nearly to the degree that it was back in like 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, great story, Pete. I mean, just having very specific thresholds that everyone understood seems like it made the difference, right? All right, here's a question from Tom Hauk, and he's asking, is there a measure for DOTs that includes staffing / employees as an asset class on the enterprise level? Anybody know of such a thing?
There was a lot of discussion from WSDOT about classifying people as assets, and I think meant to be in the positive sense. But I think there was a concern that that would be taken wrong by the agency or by the workers and not be an inclusive, equitable kind of approach. So I think we moved away from that, but certainly there's a recognition of the value of the employees, and there's a lot of measurement that we do in terms of satisfaction and what's happening within the organization. That we do an employee survey every year to see how we're tracking. We track that, we report it, we're responsible for it as an agency.
Yeah, it seems like, asset, people, whether you classify them as an asset or really a resource, an enabling resource for your agency. I think the question to me seems like, is there a way to measure if your agency is healthy in terms of the human resources you have in your agency, and to mitigate that risk if it's moving in the wrong direction?
That is like I said, that is a yearly process that we go through, and we look to that in terms of how we're progressing or not progressing in certain areas, and then we respond to deal with the risks that we see that are coming out. So we look at the responses as well as the performance the performance improvement or reduction. I mean, we did that within a number of the organization, particularly within social equity related issues. We're really keying down on that as part of one of our strategic goal areas, and really seeing how things are going in terms of our organizational health.
How about some of the other states, Minnesota, Tennessee, or Utah? Do you all have any kind of metric that you use for the staff employee side in terms of risk?
Utah doesn't have a metric, but we think a lot about the humanity of the individual. In this conversation that's been said before about measuring people as assets, that tends to sometimes push yourself, I think, as John demonstrated, into the performance category. So it's maybe rather than looking at your risk category. So if you think about humanity of individuals and what their purpose is, to serve in society, to allow opportunity to have a full and enriched life for all of those that are served by transportation, it changes that dynamic a little bit and changes that conversation from just people as an asset. And I think Paul gave a good example of that when he was talking about what's going on there in Tennessee. He talks about their turnover rate. He talks about the cost of consultants. He talks about the lack of maintaining core competency when you lose that. There's a lot of humanity pieces there that I think he identified in his presentation that really speaks to the greater piece here. But in Utah, we don't have a metric specifically addressing the item. We have changed what we call our mission statement, though, in terms of that area, and it's about improving quality of life through transportation solutions. So it's bringing that humanity piece into that conversation for us, and we now have that posted on the main part of our webpage and stuff as the Utah DOT is that new mission statement related to this issue.
Yeah, I would
Any
say,
others?
yeah, in Tennessee, I mean, I think similar to Nathan's conversation that we've kind of taken the approach of, you know, in our core values, you know, family, talking about quality of life, you know, in our mission statement and our vision statement. So that's kind of how we approach that, and have not really put a measure on, I guess, people per se in that perspective.
Yeah.
Minnesota DOT is very similar. We focus on our core values, safety, equity, and diversity and innovation, and look for ways to support those by looking at the data that we have, certainly on where we are, and then also where we want to be, what our objectives are, and then what might prevent us from getting there, so that we can prioritize how we focus our resources on ensuring that we're meeting our agency objectives in those areas.
Pete, how about you at Federal Highways?
We do, like John mentioned, we do an employee survey every 2 years. And there's a lot in that survey focused on employee satisfaction and around our values. And we are responsive to that and accountable to that. We don't have a specific measure. We are actually looking at optimizing the utilization of our staff. Like I said, we have 70 units across the country. We're only 2,500 people spread across 70 different physical units in different locations all over the country. So, you know, we're not staffed up to be able to do everything everywhere. And so we are looking at that, you know, I wouldn't say it's a quantitative metric, but more of sort of a qualitative look at, are we utilizing our staff the most effective way we can to achieve our objectives, and also to allow them the greatest opportunity to succeed.
All right, thank you. So question for you, John, from Susanna Reck. John, is there any meaning or relationship implied behind the colors in the wheel you shared? Andrew, can you move back to just show what the wheel again?
You know, to answer the question, it aligns with the colors of our department, but as you go through it, I think there's key linkages within that. It's not implied by the colors, but it really is a cross process, and you'll see each one of these areas affecting each other in a different way. That outer circle, though, to me, is one of the critical things that you can do for an agency to reduce your overall risk. When the policies aren't aligned, things don't flow through well, and issues become, like, from planning to program management to design. If you don't plan consistent with what you can design, you're going to have failures throughout the system. And so that's kind of the emphasis that we take from an agency perspective.
All right, so the next question is from Taraj Tayabi, and Taraj is asking you all if there are discussions and plans regarding internships while under COVID risk to accept or to avoid. So what are your agencies thinking about at the moment, I guess, especially as summertime is coming on?
Well, I'll start out. I think it is a great opportunity for agencies right now. We hired our summer seasonal college students. We think it was a good program. We actually had all of them do a presentation to senior leadership at the end of the summer, and there were a lot of excited people that were afraid they were going to be stuck this summer. And so it worked out well for us, and we got good work product out of the people as well. I think it makes supervisors actually work harder to provide meaningful interaction with those employees.
Anybody else have plans for this coming summer?
On the highway side, we don't do as much, sort of inspection, like we do at the state side. So we don't have as much need for, an intern to be working on a job site. And so we've continued with our summer internship program. We had it last year, we had it this year. They were all carrying out the program virtually. The one thing that has been a challenge is recruiting. And so we haven't had a big push before COVID for us to be more visible on college campuses and really to be trying to, recruit the best and the brightest to Federal Highway. And that all sort of went away with COVID. And we're I guess we're just sort of getting our feet on the ground on how to do that more, but in a better way virtually. We put together a new recruiting video, which we didn't have before. Finding those tools that can be done to attract students through a virtual mean.
All right, thanks.
We did actually, just in looking at risk, there was a lot of protocols, and you probably have in the state too, where in order to bring someone on board, in order to be working remotely, they have to have worked within the building for a certain period of time. They have to, demonstrate that they can do the job. They have to go through security clearances. A lot of that, thumbprinting, a lot that we do. And some of those protocols have been changed as a result of COVID, and some may stay that way.
Hyuna,
right. Yes.
There has been a couple of links posted out on the chat. We're going to put our strategic plan dashboard. There are some measures that people might be interested in, and Nathan also posted some good resource to Utah's work.
Yeah, that looks great. So, participants should go on the chat and grab some of those. Also, we'll grab them and include them maybe as a last page in along with the slides, so people will have it after we close this webinar. So just and then William Johnson from Colorado DOT is just sharing that generally assets are things that can be owned, resources are things that can be consumed, people are stakeholders, and stakeholder engagement can be measured. Many DOTs measure employee engagement periodically, and those results can be risks that are managed. So he's just sharing from the earlier discussion we just had. And Yvette Wixon shared a link. That's in the chat of Washington State DOT's resources. All right, well, that concludes our Q&A for today. The next bi-monthly webinar will be held on May 19th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information and to register for upcoming webinars, visit the AASHTO TPM portal. And then please continue to send us additional ideas for webinars that you'd like to see. And finally, just thank you to all of our panelists today. That was a great set of presentations and discussion. And we hope to see you at the next webinar. Bye-bye.